Welcome, Richard. I'm so excited to be able to dialogue with you again after our recent connection for the Shift Network Breathwork Summit. It's been such a pleasure discovering your work, so I'm excited that my audience can get to know more of your work. Welcome.
Thank you, Steph. It's lovely to be here, and likewise, I've loved getting to know you a bit and exploring your work as well.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, I think fundamentally what both of us are doing in our different ways is bringing people into greater awareness of what is possible from expanding the consciousness through an embodied place. And so I'd like for us today to be able to talk a little bit about that. But I think before we do that, there's going to be people listening to this who are new to your work, like I was until not that long ago. Plus, of course, there'll be your diehard fans, and I come across many of them all the time who go, oh my God, the Gene Keys, I love them. It's changed my life. So how would you encapsulate what your work is all about, Richard? What's the Gene Keys?
Yeah, well, the Gene Keys is the brand, you know. So it's the front door, and behind that door is a whole universe of synthesized wisdom, and it's constantly growing as well. So it's a transmission. It's a living transmission of, you know, diverse wisdom that I've synthesized from all around the world, and from science and art and poetry and music. And, you know, the principles of the universe are kind of contained in the Gene Keys. So the Gene Keys themselves are like these 64 codes of consciousness. And, you know, there's the big book I wrote that kind of explores those codes. But that it's about fundamental patterns everywhere in nature and in our psychology and in our ecosystems and in our biome and everywhere, this same replicating patterns. And so it's about understanding those patterns and bringing ourselves into alignment with those patterns. And also eventually, I mean, the goal of it is to transcend them, you know, so that we, you know, we return to our kind of fully awakened self. So it's a process of awakening in that sense, but it has lots of pathways and lots of kind of different things to enjoy that have different, I guess, have different routes for different people. So in that sense, it's a very diverse set of wisdom teachings. But it's to bring it back to that word wisdom. It's all about wisdom, and the wisdom's inside us, inside each of us. And the purpose of the teachings and the Gene Keys teachings is to unlock that wisdom. So it doesn't really matter. It's a toolbox, you know, at one level. If I'm just brutal, I said it's just a toolbox. And the tools are not as important as what you're actually doing with them. And so the purpose of the Gene Keys is to bring that wisdom forth from inside us. And it's a heart wisdom as well. And so it's a heart teaching. It's a very heartful, soulful set of teachings that are about embodiment and real life, you know. So it has a lot of practical applications as well. So I guess that's my starting shot.
There was so much in your starting shot there. I was like, whoa, okay, so it's a toolbox, but the tools are only as useful as what you do with them. So I really want to come back to that at some point in terms of the importance of application of these tools. The other thing that really struck me, which maybe we'll start there because it was a little bit further back, was that you said about coming into attunement with these patterns inside of us and what's moving in our bodies so that we can ultimately transcend them. And you speak about the biome and the neural pathways and how we develop our consciousness. So what I'm curious about here is, because this comes up in my work as well, attunement might be step one, recognizing what is moving in there and what is firing and driving us and what we're reacting to shift that into response. So do you think that attunement is required there, or rewiring, going beyond? Because in a way, that's also the essence of the Gene Keys, isn't it? Because we have our challenge and our gift and our siddhi.
Yes, and you know, the place to begin really is we begin in Gene Keys. We begin usually with the shadow, and the shadow being our suffering, being the issue in our life right now. You know, like so, I always say to people, you know, what's the biggest issue in your life right now? Whatever it is, you know, whether it's money or whether it's your relationship or someone dying or, you know, a health issue. There's something, and that's the place to begin, right there in the coal face, and that's where we attune. So we attune to the suffering that is universal to all human beings. And this is, so in a way, that's what the Buddha taught, and many other great teachers, is like, if you have the courage to look there, you will find diamonds hidden. And you know, so we kind of we rifle in the garbage, and then we see what's hidden underneath there. And so it takes a kind of certain person that's ready to do that. And yeah, and there are a lot of them nowadays. So that's the first step, I would say. And then we learn to kind of parent ourselves and bring ourselves deeper into that suffering and through it. And then we unlock the transformational capacity. You know, that's why you have a shadow, and in the Gene Keys teachings, like every shadow contains a gift. I say that a lot, you know, and it's a bit like, it's a cliche, you know, but it's true. Cliches are true generally. And then, you know, out of that gift also, as you mentioned, comes forth a siddhi. And a siddhi is a Sanskrit word, because there's no word in English that I could find for those, which means like a divine manifestation, a specific divine manifestation. So each of us have inside us, in our DNA, a specific divine manifestation or an algorithm of transcendence. And the Gene Keys do kind of show you those algorithms. You know, it shows you the pattern of the kind of entering into the shadow, exploring the shadow, even learning to fully embrace the shadow. And as you do so, the gift emerges, you know, out of the mud of, you know, comes the lotus, and then it blooms, you know, and the gift is creativity. You know, it's this creative inspiration, or our genius, or our higher purpose, or our service. Always out of the shadow comes beautiful things, you know, in time. And then they flower, and they then lead us further and further, those creative gifts, until we attain, you know, eventually we move to higher levels of consciousness. So we're following the perfume of our own soul as it's kind of emanated from these shadows, and it takes us further and further, and eventually it leads us to higher transcendent states of consciousness that we also have to integrate and bring into the body and into our lives. Yeah, so that's a little bit more of a entering in a bit deeper.
Well, I mean, it was beautiful. I love that you called it the perfume of our soul, and that you describe foraging in the treasure and being willing to see the collective, because it's kind of, I am you, you are me, we are one. This principle that nothing is separate from itself, and that perhaps the universal consciousness has its challenge, its gift, and its siddhi as well. You know, when we look at Mama Gaia and we look at what's happening now, and you spoke to that recently in our talk at the Shift, you know, the evolution of consciousness, and that we are on purpose in a way. So actually you answered my other question within that question, because you discussed just then where we come into the attunement through the shadow, which in my practice might be making our medicine. It's our medicine, it's our gift, it's our the way that we can understand our lived experience, go beyond that and turn it into something that is incredibly powerful as a guiding light for others, which I believe the Gene Keys are. It's just that there's 64 of them, and it's both interpersonal and global, really, the reach of it. And you then talked about the body and coming into the body, and I'd love for both of us to talk a little bit more about the importance of that. We are both former body workers, and just before we came online, you were talking about some of your practice why do you think it's important for these consciousness practices to also be related back to the body?
Well, you know, the body is our, again, another cliche, it's our temple, isn't it? And it's where everything is grounded, you know, so you can't really do a healthy spiritual practice or understand higher consciousness without the body. You know, you have to go through the body. You know, I always felt like, you know, there was great truth in some sage who said the way to heaven is down, you know, it's not up, and down and in. And so the form, you know, these forms that we're in, these contain the codes of higher consciousness. So we, you know, and so I've learned also through, you know, my own personal spiritual experiences that the body is made of light, you know, that deep down inside every aspect of our DNA is encoded light, you know, and light is everything. And so if our body's made of light, then how do we unlock that light? And it's actually literally inside the form. So it's like those diamonds hidden in the coal. And we have to kind of crack open the form of the body for that light to kind of begin to emanate through us. So all the great yogic practices of you know, almost all cultures have gone through the body in different ways. And so it's essential to kind of keep your hand in by being grounded in the body and in body practices, body-centered practices, so that you have that grounding. Otherwise you can burn out, you know, and you hear about people who burn out from time to time.
So when you speak about the great yogic practices and the embodiment piece there, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes it's positioned as though those practices are about transcending the body. And of course, we've seen that in mainstream religion, this separation of the body that is labeled as something that we need to move away from. And it's sin, it's the root of all sin. Yeah. And that consciousness and spirit are the path to heaven. So I love that you say it's actually the other way around. And again, in discussing earlier a few points with you, we were talking about presence. Now, personally, I don't feel it's possible to have full presence without being embodied, you know, because if you are developing a practice that's super strong, that's all about that transcendence and meditation and altered states and bliss states, but you're not embodied, how can you be present to another person? Would you agree with that? And
yeah. Absolutely. Well, you know, the greatest, one of the highest states of consciousness is described in the Indian traditions as Sahaj Samadhi. And Sahaj Samadhi, it means it's about being 100% present in the body. So even though there's a transcendent awareness of the cosmos and what the nature of the self is, one is utterly present in your in this. And even in your personality, you know, in all of it. And so, yeah, I love that. I'm a kind of standard bearer of that, because I know that many people would like to escape the body, you know, and I joke sometimes, and there'll be people who relate to this, probably listen to this, when I hear people say, oh, I'm not coming back again into this body, you know, I'm going off on my journey, I'm not coming back to this earth, this is my last incarnation. And I just laugh. I just go, well, you know, good luck to you. This is where I belong. I love it here, you know. And in fact, until I would say, until you absolutely love it here, you don't get away. You don't. You can't. If you utterly have loved yourself out of the form, can you leave the form? You know, and so otherwise you're just actually trying to escape the form, the old pattern of, you know, what my friend Chris Paish calls the up and out philosophy, you know, up and out instead of
up
down
and out,
and in.
yeah, as opposed to in and down.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
and
I
so
love that.
It's good to be aware of these things, that and I understand also, because many people just have a really shitty time in their bodies and in their lives, and it can be tough, very, very tough. And so, but that's why we begin with that, that suffering is the leveler. You know, we're all on the same level. We all suffer equally in different ways at different levels. And we all relate to each other through our suffering. So it's a really good place to kind of come together and sort of begin our journey from there. And we're honest as well. But the good news is that those states of challenge and difficulty and suffering do contain the seeds of transcendence. So when we really water them and we go in and we explore them, they do over time reveal their higher purpose. And so they do get easier. And like, and this again, like I'm, you know, many great teachers, I'm not one of them, but many great teachers have kind of embodied that truth, you know, by just, you know, showing people, demonstrating that the true nature of consciousness is actually joy, or even bliss, you know, if you want to go really far. That's what they call it in India, Satchitananda, and Ananda is bliss. That is what we really are. So how do we, you know, dig through that garbage dump and find the bliss underneath? You know, that's why I am here. But along the way, I'll just add, along the way, there's all kinds of fruits on the earth, and I don't think we should avoid them, you know, and even toxins, you know, in small amounts can be deeply enjoyed and appreciated. And so I'm a lover of the form, and the Gene Keys teachings and the Gene Keys community are, you know, invited to also be lovers of the form. So we, you know, I'm not an austere person. I'm a person of the world, you know, and live an ordinary life in that sense.
So much richness in there. You know, I used to run juice bars before I got into breath work, so I was very invested in health and well-being and detox programs, and one of my guiding principles was eat dirt, which was that kind of idea of ingesting some of the toxins to build a sense of both inclusion but also adaptability and all these things that we need, because you pointed to suffering before, that all human beings suffer. We all suffer in some way or another, and we often have in our own lives or still are. And I find that repeats a lot in my communities at the breathwork session, that it's the resonance and the community that allows people to exhale and land in the body and go, I'm not alone. And that's what your system is providing as well, because there's both connection. You said you're not one of the world's great teachers, but I think many would probably argue that you are that, if not becoming that. And I feel and I recognize your humility, but, you know, so let me say that on your behalf. But I'd really love to speak a little bit more about, we're talking about the importance of the body and presence. And where does that start in the body for you? I know what the answer is to this from what you've already discussed with me, but I'd love for you to share that with our listeners.
Yeah, well, as I described to you, you know, in my 20s, I was a body worker, and my area of kind of specialization was the belly, the abdominal center of our being, which has multiple systems that run through it. So working in the belly with your hands is really, really powerful work. And because it's such a tender area of our being, it is emotionally a very powerful work to do. So it can really open us. And so I brought all of those years of working in that area, both on myself and in others, into the Gene Keys. And so in many of my meditations and attunements and things, we place our hands on the belly. We could maybe do that in a minute. We place our hands on the belly and just really tune into the feminine power of that place in our being. You know, it's the deep feminine, like the crucible or the grail of the belly has this sparkling diamond in the core of it, you know, and that diamond is the center of our being, the Dantian, you know, and the ancients have always known it was there, the navel, you know, the belly button, this core, this we call it the one point, you know, and it's the singularity of our being, you know, because it's where we were born, it's where we came from, and it's where we return to. And in a way, it's like a wormhole. Even the belly button, when you look at it, it's like a wormhole. I used to diagnose wormholes, I used to diagnose people's body issues, health issues, from looking at their belly button and its shape and its patterning. And you can do that, it's a certain body of work. And anyway, so that's the wormhole at the core of our being. And it leads to, it's what links us all, that navel. And it's what, so it's the way in which we come into coherence, because it's in a way, there's a lovely word, omnicentric. The universe is omnicentric. It means that everything is the center. Everything is the center. And that's the center, is our belly button, is our navel at that one point, that singularity. And it's a black hole in a way, but on the other side of it is a white hole. So it's where we draw our nourishment from the cosmos from. And again, there are many teachers and teachings and cultures that have known this and explored this. And I'd even go a bit deeper and say it's the belly that leads to the heart, and many kind of people forget that sometimes, that unless we have done our dirty work in the belly, because the belly is where all the dirt is. It's literally where the shit is. It's literally where the intestines are. It's where, you get to learn that most of the wounds and issues and traumas from our childhood, or even karmic, are stored in the tissue that around the intestines and the belly. And so when you begin to work in there, whether you're working physically or whether you're working energetically with your breath, and there's lots of ways of working there, these deep tangles and what the ancients call sanskaras, like wound knots, begin to unwind and they begin to release, and our breath deepens. And as our breath deepens and our belly softens, this is why they have that tradition of the Buddha belly, as our belly softens and opens, then our heart opens. So those two are deeply connected. As you get your kind of belly open and soft, the heart begins to open. It's quite hard to work in your heart without having done your belly work, because you just find sometimes there are patterns of clenching, and it's quite hard to kind of get in there and loose them out because they're rooted deeper in the belly. So a lot of the work that I do is about tuning us into the belly and into that sacred feminine place, that deep womb space, that whether you're man or woman, it's there, deep inside us, that kind of, place of where we experience love, the mother's belly, the pregnant belly. And the great Sufi poets and people always spoke of this, like the pregnancy, the eternal fetus, that's in our belly, or the immortal child, the golden child, and the great feminine, cauldron of the belly, or the cauldron of rebirth, all these different things from different cultures. Over the years, I've kind of really got to see how profound humanity has understood, profoundly we've understood this part of our being. So yeah, that's hugely important for me.
I have something to share about that, because it came up in my shamanic training that particular part of the body just below the navel and around the navel is referred to the hara, which you've already mentioned in the Dantian and some traditions, but it's also labeled the center of will. And as a woman, I used to really struggle with that, because I used to think, well, if it is this deep feminine and it's this kind of center of pregnancy and emergence, for me, that feels like chaos rather than will. It feels the willingness to surrender into that swirling unknown of what the dark, deep feminine can really be. But I suspect maybe it can be both of those things. I think that's something for me to contemplate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd agree.
That it can
I did
be
a talk
both.
once called The Sword and the Chalice, and the chalice is the belly and the sword is the spine, that's kind of rooted in the belly. And so the will, or the kundalini, is it moves up the spine. It's the sword. So the will of the whole kind of is gathered in the belly, but then it moves up, and with the breath, and in this serpentine way. So they are deeply linked. It's the source of the will, of divine will, if you like, the will of the whole, rather than personal will. That's something different. Divine will is something that moves through us. Yeah.
That's helpful. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. So as part of your journey, I know you were an early student of Mantak Chia, and that you worked a lot on the belly to increase awareness of that space and that place. That's one aspect I'd like to bring in. But the other one that's really just for me an indulgence of curiosity is, if we're talking about the importance of this part of the body, and that all of those stories that are locked in there from childhood, or literally, like you said, our dirt, what do you personally have any practices that kind of focus on that are either detox based or intention and energy based? Like, how do you continue that work, and do you still use the Mantak Chia practices?
Well, those practices are deeply embedded in me, and so I don't do them formally anymore. The beautiful one that was the very first one that we all learned when back in the day, which was the inner smile, where he got you smiling to your organs in such a way that your organs started to smile back. And I don't consciously do that, but sometimes I remember that, and I realize that my organs are smiling at me because they feel happy, and yeah, I don't have specific detox practices. It's a constant awareness of that place in our being and in my being. So my hand is often there. I live from there. Our wisdom comes from there. Everything comes from there. The light is buried in there. And so all the shadow work that I speak of and do in my own life, and it's all there. And so for me, there really isn't anything else but the belly. And I never really went to the heart here, like in the chest. Like I mean, I just thought, if I stay working down here, it's all just going to be fine. That's where you need to do your work, and you just stay with that, and everything else awakens. I mean, even the chakra, I say the old chakra system, the Manipura chakra, which, and I'm talking about the belly as more than just number 3 in a line of 7, or more. It's like, it's this whole, it's the beginning and the end in there, so it is like, if you work at the beginning, then you're also working at the end. And so I don't know, for me, it's like been my passion to always be aware of that part of my body, and keep, if something comes up in me, it comes up in there, and so my hand goes there, and I kind of nurture my breath back to life, and then my heart opens again. And so I've learned that technique. It's not really a technique, it's a kind of thing that
Awareness.
It's a, yeah. But I really recommend it for people that because when we're hard on ourselves, it's almost, which is a very common human thing, it's because we're clenching. You'll know this from your breath work. We're clenching somewhere deep in our belly, and that then affects the breath in the chest and everywhere else. And in a way, I release through gentleness, and because I've learned that the belly only opens through gentleness. And I even watched Mantak Chia, and I diverted from him there because he didn't use gentleness. And I watched, and I worked on bellies for years, and I learned that the softer you touch a belly, the quicker it opens. And so I got to such a sort of, I guess, a mastery of it, so that I would touch someone's belly, and it was the quality of the touch that opens the belly. It's an unconditional love touch that has no agenda whatsoever. I have nothing invested in this touch. I don't require that you open. I don't require that you heal. I don't require you show me anything. I don't require anything of you. I just want your body to know that it is deeply loved by this universe. And I put all that into my hand, into the touch. and that and a body that a belly that hasn't felt that quality of touch in 20 years, for example, just peels open, you know. And that be it. And when the belly opens, the whole, all kinds of stuff comes out. Like, I mean, you know, in those days, you see a lot of people going to healing crisis just literally just from touching their belly. That's it, for an hour, just holding your hand on their belly for an hour. Maybe they fall asleep, and then the next week, you know, they've got all kinds of things going on, diarrhea, broken out in sweats, you know, all the stuff coming out. And I'm glad I didn't do that work anymore, because it was kind of, you had to hold your nerve. I said, all I did is held your belly for an hour, you know.
It's so interesting listening to this, because one of my taglines in my work is above all, trust your heart. And I was thinking, oh, does it have to shift to the belly then? But then you said about this quality of touch opens the belly. And so I would like to move on to the next part of what I'd like to talk to you about, because for me, the quality of presence is also what opens my heart. And so the two, they are intrinsically linked. I agree, you know, and maybe you can't, well, it sounds like you definitely can't have one without the other. What is presence to you? And let's also shift that towards this quality of grace, because you've got some upcoming work around grace. I love that word. So yeah, what is presence and what is grace?
It's a great question. Yeah. In the Gene Keys, we have words for all these cities, you know, these higher transcendent states, 64 words. And I call them sometimes the 64 names of love. And one of them is the word presence. It's the 20th key, 20th Gene Key. And actually, it's the only one that has the prefix the in front of it. You know, I don't always use it actually, but it should be the presence as opposed to presence, because it's something that comes into us that's very linked to grace, which is the 22nd Gene Key, just a couple away. And it's very linked to that energy of something that kind of emerges from within us. But also you might experience it as something that showers down upon you. So grace, we often see as something that showers down upon us. And presence is something that emerges through us. But they're the same thing, really. They're two different names for love, for the divine, but they're slightly different. That's what I love about the language of the Gene Keys, is that those 64 words for the cities describe different kind of not grays, that's not the right word, different lenses of enlightenment, you know. So an enlightened person, let's say a fully realized person manifesting Gene Key 20 presence, has a slightly different feel to them than the grace person or the ecstasy person, you know. So you listen to different higher and teachers or whatever, and they tell different things, and they share different techniques, different routes. They say opposite things a lot of the time. You're like, well, which one shall I do? And so you get to see through the Gene Keys, what are your specific cities, which I call algorithms. They're your algorithm for awakening. And yeah, so presence is universal to all of us. They all are, actually. So is ecstasy, and so is compassion. And so, but it is a very core one, because it is about the breath. It's, you know, another way I poetically describe it, it's the breath of the divine. It's being breathed by the divine. You know, it's the experience of being suffused with the presence. So these cities are hard to explain, hard to describe. I mean, I tried my best in the Gene Keys book to describe them, and you know, words don't quite get there. They kind of, so it does begin to go into poetry a bit, and because you can't quite get there with words. So the presence is something that emerges through us as we drop our shadows, as we move past them, as we transform them and transmute them. The presence is something that steadily builds through us, in us, until you can, you know, if you meet one of these very awakened beings, it's all around them. it kind of crackles in the air around them. When they speak, you feel it in your cells. You know, it's just, it's a pulse of the divine, that it's a transmission that comes through, that isn't, it's between the gaps in the atoms, it's in the silences between the words. You can't encapsulate it in words, really. So that's what I see as presence. So it's in all of us, even in a very darkly miserable person that's completely lost, or even what we might consider as evil, or kind of, you know, the presence is in them as well. It's just kind of locked down a lot more, but it's still there. so it's in and it's in everything. It's in a rock. It's in a, you know, there's nowhere it isn't. It's the breath of God. I don't know if that, it's like, I don't know, I went off on one, but
No, that's beautiful. My question there, as I listen to you, is with all of the gene keys, because you just gave the example of the 20th gene key there, and described about it arising and rising up. But do all of the gene keys rise up and come to fruition in that way when you have transcended the challenge aspects of the key?
I don't know. I think they each have their own language,
Mm.
in a way. And so, you know, grace, for example, as you also asked about, is more, you know, sometimes when people describe grace, they describe it through words like it rains, you know, grace rains down upon you. It's connected to this word Shakti, you know, from the Indian tradition. And Shakti is like, there's these two terms, Bhakti and Shakti. And Bhakti is the devotional energy that's like reaching out for grace. It's reaching out for the divine, and it stretches and reaches, and it's like it's a force of humans like praying and begging and calling out for the divine. That's Bhakti. You know, all that practice and spiritual meditation, that's all generating Bhakti. But then that, and Bhakti is devotion, you know. And then that devotion sort of at a certain point splits open some dimension, which opens up, and then grace is the response from the divine. You know, it falls upon you, you know, like rain or like petals, or, you know, that's the poetry of grace. It just sprinkles you. It's the feminine aspect. So all the Bhakti is the masculine pushing up, and then the feminine grace is the thing that falls down and just softens you, and you're like, oh, and you cry, and you talk about tears of grace, and you open up, and you're like, oh my, all that practice has paid off.
I'm just listening to you going, oh, that's probably the true origin of that practice makes perfect, not this horrible idea of what perfection is that we aspire to, that we will never reach because it doesn't exist, but the kind of ineffable qualities that you're talking about. I understand why you say that words don't always explain them. And I think that's why it's so fundamental in your work and the gene keys that it's all about contemplation. I hear you stress a lot to allow time and space, ironically, to digest the teachings, really. That's what's happening. So you have something coming up around grace. Please share more.
Yeah, no, I've got this huge teaching that's been out for ages. Actually, it's called, I've got the book here, 7 Sacred Seals, and it's like, it's hard to explain, but you know, it opens up portals to grace, and it's about the 7 rays, the 7 divine rays. It's a mystery school teaching. Some of the gene key stuff is very down to earth and practical. It's about relationships and money and prosperity. This is the mystery school aspect, so it's quite mysterious, but so I've just kind of completely renewed the whole program and the course, and it's full of amazing spiritual practices and invocations that call out to the Bhakti that calls out and to open up these portals. That's what the 7 seals are, 7 portals to grace, and each of them has a different kind of angelic guardian, a different bodhisattva, a different Christian saint, in different pantheons. So it's quite rich in its imagery, but also a different quality of angelic light, you know, and as it relates to the 7 stars and all kinds of sevens, the 7 notes of the octave, and the 7 colors of the spectrum, the 7 days of the week. And all of this is like built into these 7 seals. It's a universal code of higher consciousness. There's number 7, there's lucky 7, right? It's a special number. And so it's a practice that we do. And so I created this very simple little intro program called 7 Days of Grace, and it's free. And it basically is a series of little practices that you and teachings that you do over 7 days. And the kind of the idea behind it is that within those 7 days, you will have a moment of grace. You know, and no one knows what that moment will look like, and I can't guarantee it. You have to do the practices in the right spirit, and it might come on the 8th day or the 12th day or 4 weeks later. I don't know. We don't know. That's the mystery of grace. It's one of the few things that can't be packaged and sold in the world. You know, even the word itself is so mysterious because it contains so many other elements. So on these 7 days, we unlock each day a different element of grace with a little practice and a little lovely, sometimes it's a little meditation set to music that's just 10 minutes. You just listen to it and you just bliss out. And then the next day there's a thing on forgiveness, you know, which just takes you into the field of forgiveness. And then the next day there's something on flow and ease. Like another aspect of grace is that it's easy. You know, and that's like short circuits our modern brain. What do you mean it's easy? It can't be easy. No, look, it can't be easy. It's not easy to reach the divine. It's not an easy thing. It's very, very hard. It takes thousands of years and incarnations. And actually grace is like, no, this is the easiest thing you've ever done in your entire life. It's just been sitting in front of you all these years. All you need to do is this little prayer once a day in the morning and once in the evening. And if you do it from your heart, grace will hear you and something will sprinkle down in your life and you don't know what it is. So that's and it might happen several times in your 7-day experience. So I've sort of packaged in lots of little nuggets and lovely things that are just, I don't know, it's a bit like going to a spa, an energy spa each day. You get just lovely things to do. Like in a spa, you just do nice things, right? You just go there and you get pampered, and the 7 days of grace is like that. It's just a pampering for the soul, and you just do these little kind of practices that you build, and one of them is pausing. You know, the key thing is to create, like you said, the art of contemplation means that you create some space for grace, you know, and then you're maximizing the possibility of grace raining on you. And you don't know what it's going to be like. It might be that it brings you to tears. You know, it might be that someone says something that just goes right to your heart, or you watch something, or you see something, or something happens, and it could be something in nature, and it just opens you. It's like, oh my God, it's happened. You know, and in that moment, you're like, oh, I've been transported. You know, and when grace does touch you, it changes you forever. You know, it's just a permanent change, and it can be some tiny thing. It's a moment of awe, a ripple in the fabric of space-time, you know, inside your being. So it's a really lovely thing, and I hope people will try it and enjoy it.
Well, where can they try it and enjoy it, Richard?
Well, it'll be linked. It's linked. We can link it here, and it'll be linked on the front of genekeys.com website. And
amazing. Is that going to be available soon for people listening to this?
Yes.
And it's ongoing, so they're not going to miss.
Ongoing.
Amazing.
It's free. You can do it as many times as you want. You can, you know, and it links you in. If your imagination and your inspiration is caught by it, then it's an invitation to do the 7 Seals bigger program, which is like for serious devotees, you know. So if you want to do the light thing, that's lovely, and you can keep doing that. But if like it actually 7 days is great, but it actually takes 7 years to re-imprint the body, the cycle. We know this, right? 7-year cycles. the cells of the body get rebuilt in 7-year cycles. So the 7 seals is a serious process, like, and it's not that you have to do it for 7 years, but you may, because the practices go deep and deep, and grace opens more and more and more, you know, over a longer period, you know, and that's where you have to kind of make that devotional commitment inside yourself. But once you've had a few little successes, it's very encouraging. Like, grace is really generous in that way. Just, you know, and just as you're thinking like, oh, I think I might, I can't do this any longer, it just opens again. It says, come on, keep coming. A little bit more building of the fire. Yeah. So it's a wonderful set of spiritual practices, and kind of, I don't know, it's very mysterious. There's a whole community built up around it, supporting people, that, you know, so there's a space for grace. There's a call on the 22nd of every month, you know, that's free, and there's a space on the Clubhouse app, which is an audio app, where this beautiful group hold the space for people to just share their suffering, or share their bliss, or share anything. But the space is just held so that anything can come into that, and people really feel nurtured by it, because there's no expectation.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the nature of the teachings, is that they're very gentle. They hold you in this feminine spirit of grace, you know.
I've been in that Clubhouse room, and I've heard the grace and the softness in there of people being held, and there's just a permissiveness, really, because we often hear in this work that we're doing, that you're doing, that I'm doing, that other people who are working with embodiment practices or consciousness practices here, that sometimes we'll talk about people getting lost in story, and you know, some people need the space for those experiences to be heard without feeling guilty or ashamed because they're still there, or they're stuck there, because things move when they move, don't they? You know, my organs, by the way, are now smiling at me after all the detox work that I've done over the years, when they would definitely not have been smiling at me. But it's non-linear, you know, it's this journey, and it's expanding into being more of ourselves, into accessing that light that, as you say, is encoded within our DNA. So I'm super excited about these courses that you're offering. I'm definitely in there. I'm finding that for me, the more I open up, the more I want to simplify, and the less room I've got for all the chaos and the noise that moves around me. And it brings me into presence and grace more. One last question I'd like to end on. It's quite a big one, really. But with all of this work that you offer, Richard, which is so moving and has changed so many people's lives, what is your greatest hope from this work that you offer, or your greatest intention?
Well, you know, I guess, like, my feeling has always been that if I can just help one person, you know, or even just one being, then my destiny is fulfilled. And, you know, even if it's like, my wife is, you know, she is a kind of wildlife warden, and she, some nights during, I think it's during March, the toads are migrating, right? And she and my daughter, and sometimes me, go out at night and rescue the toads off the road, you know, because they get squished, and they kind of get stuck in the middle of the road sometimes. So actually, they go around, they just rescue them, they put them on the other side of the road, and they carry on to the pond where they're going to, you know, because it's their mating time. And I don't know why I mentioned that, but it's just, it's like the simple act of helping another creature or helping another person, even if you just do it once in your life, your life is fulfilled. And so for me, my life is fulfilled, and so I don't need anything further from my life or these teachings. Anything else is a bonus, because I've already helped one person, and that's me. You know, I did it all because of me. I'm basically selfish, you know, because I was struggling as a father, and as you know, and I needed practices that helped me. And so I built Gene Keys out of, you know, my own suffering, and I learned and taught myself. I was the first student of the Gene Keys in that way. But yeah, I guess my wish is that other people also will find that simplicity of not needing anything more from life than just this, just to be of service, even simple ways. And then even if you have great grandiose goals, you know, and I kind of have some, but they're held very lightly. I don't really care if they happen or not. But it's fun while you have a mind to dream of things. But you know, even if you have those, it doesn't matter if it doesn't come true. You're not kind of invested in success, you know, in that way. And that means that you can deeply relax in your body and in your life, and you can just enjoy simplicity of life. And I wish that for many, many people. And I think it's what we need.
I call that the coming to terms with the extraordinariness of the ordinary, you know, where actually, you know, the simple act of being grateful to have your hands in warm water, washing the dishes, or just taking a glimpse outside and watching a bird for a few minutes, or whatever it is. But the place, you know, and I can meet you there, and I can meet you in that place of that deep desire and gratitude for just being in service, because you know, in my work too, there is nothing I would rather do. I'm not attached to anything more. And I'm hoping, well, maybe less it will be what comes, you know, as I get older, actually. But that feeling of just being satisfied and content with where one is now, feels like, for me, it's the essence of presence and grace, actually. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in my clumsy human way of yes, wrapping things up that are very big into a very
that wasn't
small.
Clumsy, that was very elegant.
So thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for being with me again and sharing your wisdom and your gifts. I think at this time on earth that it's very, very important what you do, actually. And so, you know, hopefully even though you've just say you're satisfied if you've helped one person, knowing that you can continue to help that one person each time that becomes millions is fantastic.
Yeah, bring it on. Why not?
Bring it on. Why not? Thank you. So when this podcast or this video goes live, we're going to link all the places that people can find you, Richard, underneath. In the meantime, I wish you such a beautiful day of full presence and grace.
Oh, thank you, Steph. You are just gold.
I'll take that. Thank you.